Dan Acre, Operations Manager, Ontario Regiment Museum. This is one of our ferrets. The actual museum started when a number of ferrets were purchased from the Canadian Forces when they were surplus to use, and they actually formed a ceremonial troop for the Ontario Regiment. So basically a bunch of military, ex-military, and just vehicle enthusiasts got together to maintain the vehicles, and that eventually grew into what is today the Ontario Regiment Museum collection. This vehicle is really cool. The concept of a scout car is based on reconnaissance the World War II way. There's two ways of doing reconnaissance. One is reconnaissance by fire, reconnaissance basically fighting for information. The other is basically sneak and peek reconnaissance. This is the vehicle that was used for sneak and peek reconnaissance. So the idea is that you have vehicles that are always working in pairs, one moving, one observing. Their biggest weapon is a radio. They want to have agility, they want to have great cross-country performance, they want to have a certain amount of protection, and they want to be able to approach the enemy through using tactical movement to get as close as possible to observe the enemy and report. Remember, reconnaissance are the eyes of the army. Working in twos meant that if one is watching, one would always be watching while the other one is moving. If the moving one suddenly went kabam, at least the one that is watching can report to higher saying, oh, I think we have found the enemy. So this was low techy. The most important function of the reconnaissance vehicles is to have a good radio, because unless reconnaissance can report what they have found, they are useless. This is a beautiful scout car because it is extremely agile. It's four-wheel drive all the time. It's got a Rolls-Royce engine. It's got a two-man crew. There is a possibility of putting a third person in it, but it gets very cramped inside. We're going to take a look at the inside in a second, but what's really important is the sides are tin because they're just carrying. But the actual hull that surrounds the driver, the commander, and the engine is fairly strong, fairly well armored. So you do have quite a bit of protection. Lot had a machine gun mounted on top for close defense. You find a lot of reconnaissance vehicles have a weapon, but it's usually a weapon of last resort, because if you have to use a weapon, you haven't been doing your job properly, especially in sneak and peek reconnaissance. We're going to go take a look inside. Really cool vehicle. A couple of things about the vehicle. You'll notice the driver sits in the middle of the vehicle. He's not sitting to the left, he's not sitting to the right. That's interesting when you're driving, because if you're North American or you're from the rest of the world, except for England, you're used to driving, to having your seat on the left-hand side of the car. So if you're judging yourself down the road, usually I judge by my left shoulder and the white line. If you use the same, because you're in the middle of the vehicle, if you're using the same sort of orientation system as to where you are in the lane, basically about every third of the vehicle is in the next lane. So when you're driving this, the crew commander has to sort of remind you, steer for the middle of the lane. That takes a little while to get used to, but once you get it, it's really fun. If you look at the steering wheel, you note that it's tilted away from you. So you actually have to steer it like a boat. So you're actually grabbing the top of the steering wheel and feeding it from one hand to the other. It's got a pre-select gearbox, which is not complicated. It's just something you have to get used to. It's sort of the worst of automatic transmission and the worst of standard transmission put together. But as you can see, it's a very small, very tight vehicle, very agile, 80 kilometers an hour, difficult to see, and really fun to drive once you get used to its quirks. Really probably one of the best scouting reconnaissance vehicles wheeled ever made. Thank you.